Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have all been in awe of the bravery of the Iranian people since the death of Mahsa Amini over 5 weeks ago. The Iranian people have taken to the streets to express in no uncertain terms that the sustained repression of their rights by the Iranian regime must end. Women should no longer face detention and violence for what they wear or how they behave in public. The Iranian regime's use of live ammunition and birdshot against protesters is barbaric. There have been reports of at least 23 children having died, and NGOs suggest over 200 deaths during the protests. Mass arrests of protesters and the restriction of internet access are sadly typical of this oppressive regime's flagrant disregard for human rights. These are not the actions of a government listening to the legitimate demands of its people for greater respect of their rights. It can be no surprise that the Iranian people have had enough. 2022 has seen a sharp increase in the use of the death penalty, a sustained attack on the rights of women, intensified persecution of the Baha'i, and greater repression of freedom of expression and speech online. The UK has been robust in joining the international community's response to holding Iran accountable for its human rights violations. The Foreign Secretary summoned the most senior Iranian official in the UK on Monday, the 3rd of October, to express our concern at the treatment of protesters. On the 10th of October, the UK imposed sanctions on Iran's so-called morality police and 7 individuals responsible for serious human rights violations in Iran on Monday, the 10th of October. The UK has consistently raised the situation in Iran in the UN Human Rights Council and through other multilateral fora. On the 13th of October, the UK issued a joint statement with European partners condemning the death of Mahsa Amini and calling on Iran to stop the violence and listen to the concern of its people. On the 20th of October, the UK joined 33 other members of the Freedom Online Coalition in issuing a joint statement condemning internet shutdowns in Iran. We continue to work with our international partners to explore all options for addressing Iran's human rights violations. Through the UK's action on sanctions and robust statements with international partners, we have sent a clear message. The Iranian authorities will be held accountable for their repression of women and girls and for the shocking violence that they have inflicted on the Iranian people.
Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank you for granting this urgent question today, and indeed my honourable friend the Minister for her answer. I'd also like to thank the Foreign Secretary for his letter yesterday advising me that I've been sanctioned by the Iranian regime. Now, since the brutal murder of Mahsa Amini by the morality police, there's been a nationwide uprising in Iran. Contrary to what my honourable friend the Minister has advised, the National Council of Resistance of Iran advised that more than 400, mainly female protesters, have been murdered, and more than 20,000 have been arrested over the last 39 days of nationwide protests. So, does my honourable friend agree with me that we must issue the most strongest condemnation of these killings and mass arrests? And in order to do so, is it not right that we recall our ambassador from Tehran and even consider closing our embassy in Iran to demonstrate to Iran this is unacceptable? Would she also agree with me that we need to recognise the Iranian people's right to self-defence and resistance in the face of this deadly crackdown that particularly targets women and their right to actually establish a democratic republic? And I note the sanctions that have been issued by our government against particular individuals in Iran, but does she not agree with me that it now would be completely the wrong time to renew the JCPOA agreement and give Iran the capability to establish nuclear weapons? Does she also agree with me that it's now time to prescribe the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps and sequestrate their assets in the UK?
Minister.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman, and I think I probably ought to congratulate him on his being sanctioned. It shows all of the efforts that him and many colleagues in this House have taken to call out the regime and the terrible actions that are taking place in Iran. And, of course, the death of Mahsa Amini in Iran is a shocking reminder of the repression faced by women in Iran. We condemn the Iranian authorities. Obviously, we've taken very strong action. We condemn the crackdown on protesters, journalists and internet freedom, and the use of violence in response to the expression of fundamental rights by women or any other members of Iranian society is wholly unjustifiable. We will continue to work, including with our international partners, to explore all options for addressing Iran's human rights violations, but I'm sure, as the honourable gentleman knows, we will never be able to comment on possible future actions or sanctions or designations.
And the Minister Bambot Chorobon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For the last 6 weeks, Iran has seen huge protests following the death of Mahsa Amini at the hands of its brutal morality police. Ms. Amini was violently beaten following her arrest for breaching strict hijab rules. Iranians in huge numbers have bravely said they will not accept this any longer. Women and girls are putting their lives on the line to lead a mass movement calling for nothing more than basic human rights and civil liberties. Braving severe state repression, hundreds of thousands of Iranians have joined protests. Over 12,500 have been arrested, and sadly over 250 people have died at the hands of the security forces. Britain must support all those who stand up for basic freedoms, freedom of conscience and religion, and freedom to live one's life as one chooses. It is clear that the Iranian regime is restricting information in an attempt to quash these protests. Internet access has been periodically blocked in the country, meaning that details of human rights abuses cannot be shared and that protesters cannot organise. Freedom of information is integral to the success of any political movement. The UK must and can play a strong role in supporting an independent press in Iran. Reporters Without Borders has declared Iran one of the worst countries in the world for press freedom. Journalists are routinely face harassment, detention and threats to their families. And so I ask the Minister, what is the UK government doing to encourage press freedom in Iran? And what pressure is the UK putting on Iran to support fundamental human rights and freedom of speech? The UK can and should lead calls for the UN Human Rights Council to urgently establish an international investigative and accountability mechanism to collect, consolidate, preserve and analyse evidence of the most serious crimes in Iran under international law. So can the Minister assure me that the UK will do this? Thank you.
Minister.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his statement, and I think there's much that we agree in this House, all of us, in the condemnation of what is happening in Iran and in terms of the actions of how we work with others. We're looking at all options to hold Iran to account for its human rights violations, and we are active participants in the Human Rights Council. In terms of press and press freedom, last week we joined a statement of the Media Freedom Coalition condemning Iran's repression of journalists, and we will continue to do that, to work with others, to work with other countries, to work with other groups, to call out Iran, as well as taking firm steps, as I laid out earlier in my statement.
Chair of the Select Committee, Alicia Cairns.
Speaker, I congratulate my honourable friend for securing this important UQ. What we are seeing in Iran is state-industrialised femicide, and abroad we are seeing them being increasingly aggressive in support of terrorist states and terrorist organisations. So will we finally act and sanction Iran's Revolutionary Grand Corps, who are sending surface-to-surface missiles to Russia? They are supporting proxies across the region, and they are spreading harmful radicalising narratives online. And on that point, will she please broaden our classification of terrorist content beyond Salafi Takfiri extremist ideology to include Shia Islamist extremist materials, because that is only the way we will protect our own communities here at home as well from their reach?
Minister.
Yes, I mean, we obviously have an assessment which we share with the Honourable Lady about Iran and their support for regimes, including Russia, and we will continue to work with others to call out what is happening, and of course we condemn their support of anything to do with Russia and the Ukraine war.
SNP spokesperson Alan Smith.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm very glad you granted this urgent question today, sir, and I would commend the member for bringing this forward, and indeed the Minister for her answer. I think the SNP and all of us stand in solidarity with the brave protesters in Iran in their actions against a brutal regime. I grew up in Saudi Arabia myself. I struggle to sound rational about any morality police anywhere. I'm familiar with these men, I'm familiar with what they do. And I would stand shoulder to shoulder with the UK government in their efforts to hold them to account. These triggers, of course, were kicked off by the femicide, to our mind, of Mahsa Amini. There is a clear gender aspect to this, which I think we can all agree on. It was Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe in the Sunday Times, I think, put it best. She has a greater familiarity with Iranian regime's brutality than anyone. Mahsa's death is the latest blow to the people of a country long abused. Women in Iran are desperate, they are furious and restless. They cannot take it anymore. So I commend the Minister in her statement, but what more can the UK Government do to ensure accountability of the perpetrators of femicide? Does His Majesty's Government view the murder of Ms Amini as femicide? And further to the honourable gentleman's point about closing the UK mission, could I take the other view and say that closing the mission would shut down that dialogue when actually we need to continue those efforts in country?
Thank you. Minister.
Yes, of course, we do need to continue efforts and dialogue within country as well, and that also holds for continued discussion also on the nuclear deal, which has been mentioned. We do continue and will also always continue to work with our like-minded partners to ensure that Iran is held to account, including via the Human Rights Council in Geneva and the UN General Assembly in New York. Permanent representative to the Human Rights Council in Geneva, Ambassador Simon Manley, has raised the death of Mahsa Amini in the 51st session of the Human Rights Council, and he called on Iran to carry out independent, transparent investigations into her death and the excessive violence used against subsequent protests. We've joined 52 other countries in a joint statement to the Human Rights Council urging restraint and accountability from Iranian law enforcement. And of course the EU, Canada, US have also sanctioned the morality piece and individuals, and we will continue to work with those like-minded individuals, but cannot of course comment on any future designations or sanctions.
Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I congratulate my honourable friend on securing this urgent question and on his sanctions, and send out a very loud and clear message from this Parliament that we stand with the women and girls of Iran as they fight for their civil rights. But it's not just in their own country that the Iranian regime is causing repression and havoc. They are also selling drones that are being used to attack civilians in Ukraine. Can I urge the Minister with the greatest urgency, as sanctions are working on Russia and their missiles are running out, that she look very closely at how we can sanction those who are arming those who would do the Ukrainians harm.
Minister.
Yes, I can assure the Honourable Lady that we will continue to look at any possible actions that we can take. But of course, I think the Honourable Lady understands that I cannot comment on any of those. But we are aware of these actions, and we are aware of the support of Iran for the Russian forces.
Steve McCabe.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I congratulate the honourable gentleman for Harrow East in securing the urgent question, and I'm delighted I get to join him in that select group who have obviously upset the regime by telling the truth about them. I welcome the recent sanctions decision, but I wonder if there are any plans to extend it to other human rights abusers, and I wonder if the Minister might like to consider former Technology Minister Mohammad Javad Asari Jaroumi and IRGC Commander Salar Abnoush, who are two people who would certainly merit being put on the sanctions list.
Minister.
May I also congratulate the honourable gentleman on his also being sanctioned, and of course it's because of the work that you and other members are doing in this Parliament to call out these actions and to call for more action from the UK Government as well. But I think the honourable gentleman understands that we cannot comment on some possible future actions or on individuals.
Stephen Crabb.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Murder and brutal repression internally, sponsorship of terrorism overseas, selling deadly drones that target civilians to the invading Russian army. The list of the crimes of the Iranian regime are very long indeed. And when you look at all of these activities, time and time again, it's the role of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard that comes up. So I don't expect the Minister to comment on specific sanctions measures, but would she at least pledge to the House that she will take back the strong message from this place today to the Foreign Secretary, to her colleagues in the Foreign Office, that it's the strong view of this House that the IRGC should be prescribed in full as a terrorist organisation.
I thank the honourable gentleman and also congratulate him on being one of the 7 individuals sanctioned and again for raising again and again the concerns. We have been clear about our concerns about the IRGC's continual destabilising activity throughout the region. The UK maintains a range of sanctions that work to constrain the destabilising activity of the IRGC. The list of prescribed organisations is kept under constant review. I will take back the message, but we do not routinely comment on whether an organisation, as I know the honourable gentleman is aware, is or is not under consideration for prescription.
Mr
Speaker, these brave women are frankly inspirational, and we would be so lucky for them, if they were able to get out of Iran, to come here and get sanctuary. Could the Minister explain, is there any chance of a lifeboat scheme for these women should they be able to get out? And something very practical. She'll remember that during the Ukraine-Russia conflict, the BBC was given extra money to ensure that the World Service could broadcast in Ukrainian and also in Russian. Is there any chance that that could also happen for BBC Persia, which currently faces the chop?
Minister.
Well, I thank the honourable lady for her question, and I also will join her in commending the bravery of the women in Iran. It's very easy for us to sit here, but to see and hear about what they're doing every day takes an incredible courage, and they really are showing huge strength. Of course, in terms of BBC Persia, the BBC is operationally independent and editorially independent, but we do provide funding. The FCDO is providing the BBC World Service with over £94 million of funding, so that's over the next 3 years to support the BBC World Service. And in terms of any future actions we may do, obviously we keep everything constantly under review, but we don't have anything yet to announce in this area.
Not Andrew Morris.
Mr. Speaker, sanctions glisten, but they also cast a shadow. And I'm deeply envious of honourable colleagues who have been sanctioned and can only hope mine is in the post. Mr. Speaker, can the Minister assure us that there can be no possibility of progress on the JCPOA whilst Iran continues to export weapons of terror, in particular drone technology, to Russia to aid in Putin's war against Ukraine? And when the ambassador was called into the Foreign Office, can she assure me that that was made crystal clear to him?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question, and I'm sure his letter possibly could be in the post if he continues to raise his concerns so robustly. Iran's nuclear programme has never been more advanced than it is today. Iran's escalation of its nuclear activities is threatening international peace and security and undermining the global non-proliferation system. If a deal is not struck, the JCPOA will collapse. In this scenario, we will carefully consider all options in partnership with our allies. But the JCPOA, while it's not perfect, it does represent a pathway for constraining Iran's nuclear programme.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Like the previous speaker, I'm a bit upset that I haven't been sanctioned yet. I obviously need to try a bit harder, so here goes. We're talking about a bunch of women-hating, homicidal maniacs and clerical fascists. Now, on that basis, surely it's time now to ban the IRGC. Some of us have been calling for some time for the IRGC to be banned. My honourable friend for Worley and I called for it on one of the last sitting days in July. Can't the government now, they've had time to think about it, can't the government now just get on and ban them?
Yeah.
Minister.
Well, I congratulate the honourable gentleman on his attempt to join his colleagues, and I'm sure he'll continue to do so. As I said earlier, we have been clear about our concerns about the IRGC's continued destabilising activity, but we do not routinely comment on whether an organisation is or is not under consideration for prescription. But we will obviously maintain a range of sanctions that work to constrain the actions and some of the activities of the IRGC.
Mr. Speaker, can I congratulate my honourable friend for receiving this UQ and you for obviously granting it. Can I just say to my honourable friend of the front bench, It is quite clear now Iran is a pariah state, and that means all of our policy towards it must be directed on that basis that you really can't deal with them in the same way any other state. They supply Russia with weapons. They're linked now to China, and they're developing their nuclear weapons. And the brutality that we have seen meted out to those who are peacefully protesting, as their human rights here would allow them, is appalling. So can I urge my honourable friend in response to, first of all, no longer continue the JCPOA because it is giving them succour and they are still developing nuclear weapons, and importantly, now prescribe the IRG once and for all to tell them that their behaviour will no longer be tolerated and there are more sanctions to come.
Minister.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. We've always been clear that Iran's nuclear escalation is unacceptable. It is threatening international peace and security and undermining the global non-proliferation system. However, as I mentioned earlier to my honourable friend, whilst not perfect, it does represent, the JCPOA does represent a pathway for constraining Iran's nuclear programme. A restored deal could pave the way for further discussions on regional and security concerns, including in support of the non-proliferation regime. And as I mentioned earlier with the IRGC, we do not comment and cannot comment on future potential sanctions, but we do keep it constantly under review.
Holly Lynch.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Of course, we welcome that the government has sanctioned key senior officers of Iran's brutal morality police and the Revolutionary Guard, as well as those involved in the supply of drones to Russia. But sanctions currently do focus on those primarily based inside Iran. So can I ask government ministers, what are we doing to ensure that those with links to the Iranian regime, with visas allowing them to be based here in the UK, understand our strength of feeling about the Iranian regime's unacceptable conduct towards its people, women and girls in particular?
Minister.
I thank the honourable lady for her comments, and I think even having these debates, which this is the second one in the very few weeks I've been in the job that I've been on this subject, and I think continuing to raise the pressure, we will continue to work with allies, we will continue to raise concerns via our participation in Human Rights Council, and we will constantly keep things under review.
Line notes.
Congratulate my honourable friend on having secured this important urgent question. There is a large Iranian diaspora in Southampton, and the women and girls who have been to see me have been very clear. We must call out the murder of Mahsa Amini as femicide. It is the women and girls of Iran who are bearing the brunt of the repression. But I would like to echo the comments about the BBC. Knowledge and information is power, and too little is both coming out of Iran and going into Iran to support those brave individuals. Will she please go and talk to colleagues at DCMS to make sure that there is sufficient funding for the World Service so the important work of BBC Persia can continue?
Minister.
I completely agree with the honourable lady that the bravery of the women in Iran, which I'm sure her diaspora in her area of Romsey and Southampton are very proud of. We will continue to work closely with our like-minded partners to make sure that Iran is held to account for the death of Mahsa Amini, including via the Human Rights Council in Geneva. And as I mentioned earlier, we have in the FCDO put additional funding towards, or put £94 million over the next 3 years towards supporting the BBC World Service, which is a vital lifeline and vital for people both inside Iran and also at home here.
Sammy Wilson.
Urgent question today, and I know that in the discussions which I've had with the various opposition groups that lobby us here in Parliament, that the profile which questions like this give to the issues which concern them is very important and very heartening. Could I just say to the Minister, it's quite clear that the Iranian regime not only tortures and abuses its own citizens, but is now an exporter of terrorism across the world. And whilst I don't expect her to make comment on what she is going to do in relation to prescription and sanctions against the likes of the IPRG, could she give us what I think this House wants is, rather than a statement from her today about what she's going to do, just do it. We don't need her to tell us. We don't need any information about it. Just do it.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his instruction, gently delivered as always. Of course, we do keep everything under review, but as the honourable gentleman has identified, it would not be appropriate to discuss any future possible actions from this dispatch box right now.
Bob Stewart. Mr. Speaker, could I ask the Minister to assure the House that London doesn't become a place of safe refuge for the Iranian regime proponents? Can she assure me, for instance, that money from Iran funding platforms which are pro-Iranian in this country are closely looked at? And in particular, can she assure me that there is quite a substantial rumour that families of the leaders in Iran are getting British passports, which to me is iniquitous?
I will assure the honourable gentleman that I will look into the questions that he has raised. Obviously, we have our own rule of law here in the UK, but in relation to the rumours he's heard about passports, I haven't heard those, but I will certainly look into that and write to the honourable gentleman.
Very Gardner.
Why is it still possible to purchase a cheap tourist flight from London to Tehran for £158?
Nobody wants to go there.
If the government sanctions are strong enough, surely we should be stopping the travel to that country and from it.
Well, I think, as one of the honourable members has pointed out, the price shows the popularity of the destination.
Mike Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The brutal regime in Iran is being financed by up to $100 billion a year in sanctions relief, despite them delivering almost no concrete action on nuclear non-proliferation. Will my honourable friend press our international partners to make sure that such sanctions relief is tied to Iran delivering on their international obligations?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. A viable deal was put on the table in March, in which would have returned Iran to full compliance with its JCPOA commitments and returned the US to the deal. Iran has refused to seize a critical diplomatic opportunity to conclude the deal with continued demands beyond the scope of the JCPOA. We are considering the next steps with our international partners, but I'm sure, as the honourable gentleman is aware, we cannot comment on them at this point.
Christian Wakeford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I start by putting on record my support and admiration for all those girls and women who not only are protesting but putting their own lives on risk on a daily basis. But, Mr. Speaker, for seeing some violent crackdowns against civilians by the regime in recent days, a reminder of the Islamic Republic's attitude towards dissent at home and abroad. Crackdowns against dissent are led by the regime's ideological terror army, the IRGC. So in light of the horrific state violence in recent days, and again what we saw back in 2019, we've seen in this House, in this chamber, multiple times where all sides and all parties are calling for the IRGC to be prescribed. When's it going to happen, Minister?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question, but I'm afraid I'll have to refer him to my earlier answer, which is we cannot comment. We keep things under review, but we cannot comment on any future actions.
Greg Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've listened carefully to the answers that my honourable friend has given, but given that the IRGC finances and directs terror proxies across the whole Middle East, including its Lebanon-based proxy Hezbollah, which has stockpiled over 150,000 missiles on the Israel-Lebanon border, can my honourable friend explain to me why we prescribe Hezbollah as a terrorist group, but not its financier and director, the IRGC?
Minister.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question, and there is obviously a great deal of strength of feeling on this subject, which, as I've committed to, will also take back to the Foreign Secretary. But the list of prescribed organisations is kept under constant review, but we do not routinely comment on why or whether an organisation is or is not under consideration for prescription, or indeed why or the thought process behind those that are prescribed.
Wayne David.
Mr Speaker, can I say that I strongly support the sanctions which the Government is imposing, and indeed I would like to see them go further. But can the Minister give a commitment that those sanctions will not have a negative impact on ordinary Iranian people?
It's a very important question, and of course when we consider sanctions we always consider what can work and also the impact it will have on people. Our sanctions impose restrictions on the morality piece as a whole and senior security and political figures in Iran. These sanctions will ensure that the individuals designated cannot travel to the UK and any of their assets held in the UK will be frozen.
Anna Fur.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The courage and bravery of these young women in standing up to the brutal and authoritarian regime in Iran is quite frankly incredible. These young women are superheroes and they deserve our full support and admiration. As a country, I'm proud of what we're doing to stand up for human rights in Ukraine. I believe we should be doing the same for these young women in Iran. I welcome the increased sanctions put in place last week on Iranian individuals and businesses responsible for supplying Russia with kamikaze drones used to bombard Ukraine. But would my right honourable friend agree with me that as well as condemning the Iranian regime on human rights, we should also condemn their place on the UN's Commission for the Status of Women? There can be no excuse for a regime that treats women with such contempt to sit on a commission that should be working to promote global gender inequality and empowerment of women wherever they live.
Can I just remind people they are meant to be questions, not speeches. It's very important, but I need to get Rod in.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I congratulate my honourable friend because it's very important. There will be people watching this debate, there will be people hearing what we are saying, and there are people, whether they're in the diaspora or whether they are indeed in Iran, and I'm sure it gives a great deal of strength and courage to people to know the strength of feeling in this place as well. But the protests also send a clear message that the Iranian people are not satisfied with the path that the government has taken, and we now urge Iran to listen to its own people, to respect the right to peaceful assembly, to lift all the restrictions, to stop unfairly detaining protesters, and most importantly to ensure women can play an equal role in society.
Ruth Caplan.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Following on from her response to my honourable friend's question, my honourable friend from Caerphilly's question, she talked about sanctions against the elites who often do not suffer from the impact of broad brush sanctions. So what discussions has the Minister had with her counterparts in the Department for Education about removing study visas from the family members of regime members who are living here, far from the restrictions imposed on them in Iran, and particularly on women?
Yeah.
I thank the Honourable Lady for a question. Just to make clear that in addition to the sanctions which were very recently imposed on the 10th of October, there are about almost 300 sanctions and various sanctions on various activities and people and organisations within Iran, and we do continue to keep them under review, but I cannot comment on any future potential actions that may be taken.
Ruth Jones.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In recent months, the Iranian government has systematically inflicted untold cruelties on the people of the Baha'i faith, and the world has watched on. As Baha'is across the world today mark the Twin Holy Days, and I send them my best wishes, can the Minister tell me what precise steps the government has taken to support and protect this important and targeted community?
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. It's very important, and it indeed was the subject of a Westminster Hall debate not long ago. And of course, we condemn any actions that restrict freedom of religious belief.
Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I'd first like to start by sending my solidarity and support with the women and the girls in Iran fighting for their human rights. But would the Minister agree with me, in light of recent events and the attacks on human rights, the BBC's decision to close down its Persian radio service is deeply unfortunate, given that so many are relying on it as a lifeline? And will she undertake to speak to the BBC Director General to ask if this closure can be reviewed and reversed?
Minister.
So thank the Honourable Lady for her question. BBC Persia is a legitimate journalistic operation. It's still in operation, and it's editorially independent from the UK government. But I am shortly meeting with the BBC World Service, and I will discuss this matter further with them.
Margaret Ferrier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Security forces are demanding teachers in Iran hand over names of troublemakers, risking arrest if they refuse. One teacher in Tehran has reportedly died trying to protect students. What support is the UK and our allies providing to protect teachers specifically from these terrifying abuses of their human rights?
I thank the Honourable Lady for her question, and also for bringing to light the plight of teachers as well. There are many protesters who are bravely protesting, but knowing that they are also putting themselves in danger as well, which is why I very much welcome being able to put on record our condemnation of all the actions that the regime is taking in.
Jim Shannon.
Can I thank the Minister very much for her strong stance and the answers to the questions. It's encouraging to have time dedicated to this important topic that is escalating at pace in Iran. But it is regrettable, however, that many other groups are facing oppression from the Iranian state. And we must not forget those amid the ongoing crisis. So will the Minister assure myself and this House of her support for those of other religion and belief groups in Iran, particularly the Baha'is and Christians as well, who have been long suffered at the hands of the Iranian regime and have, with thousands of others, their freedom of religion and belief has been violated?
Yes, I thank the Honourable Gentleman for his question, and of course also I believe he also took part in the debate in Westminster Hall, as many of us did, and I think I met with a number of people after that debate as well, and they were delighted not only that honourable members to keep pushing their case, but also to keep the debate live and active, and to always call out wrongdoing wherever